welcome everybody who is there waiting for us. There might have been some technical problems of for me, because I'm always experiencing some, but I think we are sorted out, so I can start with the presentation. So for anybody who did not hear my talks before, my name is Dorota. I'm coming from Global Underwater Explorers, so-called GUE. I'm instructor there. I'm instructor evaluator there. I'm working as well within the organization. I'm developing training materials and training programs. So I'm so-called recreational administrator, which means that I'm taking care about programs that are not tech and they are not cave. My diving experience, I started to dive in the 90s, and I started to teach in 99. So I do have a quite vast teaching experience. And for GUE, I started to teach in 2005. And since then, I developed within the organization. And currently, I only teach for GUE and work there. And today, the second talk of the day for me today is talking a little bit about one of the specific equipment that GUE is using, which is a twin set or a double tank. So let me start with this one. So generally, you could see why should I dive twin set, which is a set of two tanks, which is heavier and it's more complicated. So there are certain reasons and there are certain specifics for our configuration and then how we approach that I would like to share with you. So for those who doesn't know what a twin set is, so very briefly and very generally speaking, because I will go into a little bit more detail later on, a twin set or doubles are a set of tanks that are put together by bands and something that we call a manifold, which is a set of more valves than on a single tank that allow or that are required for certain types of environments and certain types of dives, though even more and more, you can see recreational divers diving recreational dives in open water environments using twin sets because they do bring certain benefits for in-water stability and some other benefits that I will discuss as well. So, so why basically we would use doubles? So first of all, doubles they are required for certain types of dives, because if you have more tanks, it means you carry more gas. So this is one of the biggest reasons why you should have a twin set or doubles, because they are allowing you to have twice as much gas as in a single tank. So if you are looking into going into technical diving, which is deeper, requiring decompression, or cave diving, which as well requires you to be able to solve problems in that environment, you would need to have more gas. Because, and I will go into more detail a little bit later, because this would allow you not only to be there for longer, but as well, the way they are assembled and configured allows you to deal with emergency when you are there. And as I mentioned on my previous talks about GUE training, I perceive cave and tech diving as overhead diving in a way. And then you might ask why technical diving I would treat as an overhead. But if you are going deeper for longer time and then you have an obligation for decompression, you cannot really ascend anytime you want. So there is, in a way, a ceiling above your head preventing you from directly ascending. So all of the problems that you will encounter in there, you will need to solve underwater. So that's why a twin set with its redundancy, that I will as well discuss in a second, is really required. And of course, because you have more gas, you can stay longer. So this is as well a benefit for recreational divers. Even if you want to dive 30-meter dive, but you want to spend there more time, then you can go into a twin set. And as well, it allows for, as I mentioned before, equipment redundancy. So there are generally quite a lot of benefits for diving those. So first of all is the amount of gas that you carry, because then for certain dives, you just need to have more gas to being even able to enter the environment and able to make a decent dive that doesn't last 5 minutes, but can last 30 minutes, which is already a quite big difference. So we do have a redundant gas supply, and about this I will talk a little bit more when I'm discussing more in detail the configuration that we have. And with this gas redundancy is the next feature that it's mentioned here on the slide, that it allows you to isolate one tank from the other. So in case of a failure on that system, you are able still to preserve some of the gas, doesn't allow it to leak if there is any issues with your tanks or regulators, and the regulators are free flowing, or there is an issue with O-rings on tanks or on the regulators. And there is one more thing that I would like to discuss a little bit more in detail, is the increased stability underwater. And what I mean by that is that now if you see the image on the screen, the diver there is in a nice trim position, and you can see that the wing, so the buoyancy source that the diver is carrying, is cradling the tanks quite nicely. So what it means is that the gas on your back, which is one of the benefits that you are having when you are diving a backplate and a wing configuration, that the gas is behind your back, nothing is restricting in the front. But here, additionally, because the tanks are connected together, they are wider than a single tank, and then the air is on the gas that you have in the wing is on both sides of it, making it much more stable. Because if you look at yourself underwater from this profile, which is much more easier to tilt from time to time, from side to side if you are looking at a single tank, then if you add the second tank, it makes you a little bit more stable. So if you compare it, if you learn how to ride a bike, in the beginning you will have this additional wheels on the rear wheel, so you will have this kind of supporting wheels on the side, and it will make you a little bit more stable. And this is similar to what you have in a twin set, because the twin set is wider, the gas is distributed on a broader surface, so wider surface, and it makes you much more stable underwater. And this is one of the benefits that many recreational divers really are looking forward when they first try twin set. They say, wow, I'm really stable, and I do not have this tendency to wobble from side to side. And if you add to that the configuration that we are using on those equipment, so a harness that fits really very well, that it's equipped with a crotch strap that prevents the twin set from moving on your back, it's even more comfortable in that sense. So now, what are the disadvantages? Because it's not only a benefit to diving doubles. So first of all, it requires more increased equipment awareness, as we call it. So this equipment is a little bit more complicated. And the biggest complication that comes with it is you have more valves. So you have 3 valves instead of 1 or 2, depending on type of valve that you would have on a single tank. The valves are, of course, turning, so that you can, if you are not really trained well, or if you are not really aware and paying attention, you might confuse the directions of turning of those valves, and then it might create a situation that you are swimming with tanks with the valves that are closed if you think that they are open. So they require a little bit more of equipment awareness. Of course, because they are bigger, they will increase your drag underwater. So it will take more effort to swim with those, because it's not only the volume that they increase, the wing is a little bit bigger as well. And additionally, they are, of course, heavier because it's the double amount of weight in regards of how much tanks you carry. They will require more power and more effort. That's why very often, if you look at GUE divers, or generally divers who are using twin sets, they will use very rigid fins, more rigid fins, because it will give them the power to move forward with this additional equipment. And that's why as well GUE is emphasizing a lot training related to your maneuvering and positioning and power techniques for swimming, because you need to have the ability not only to dive underwater with it against the current, but you will need to as well swim potentially on the surface, fighting with the current or fighting with waves on the surface. And this is just bigger and heavier. So you would need to be aware that it will require a little bit of more stamina maybe, and a little bit more strength, because walking with those twin sets, it's a little bit heavier too. And additionally to that, there are more failure points compared to a single tank and a single regulator, because now you will have 2 outlets with more regulators. It is in a way compared to a single tank that has a dual outlet, which is quite common in Europe, where I come from, and then when I have been diving for a while, for quite a bit. So additionally to having 2 regulators, you will have as well 3 valves with more O-rings, with more knobs, and all of those components, they can fail. So then it is increasing the possibility of having more failures if you are underwater. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about the configuration itself. because understanding on how it is built will allow you as well to make more educated decisions. So the basic components of a twinset, of course, they are tanks. So the twinset or doubles, it's two tanks that are combined, or they are put together by a set of bends. They are two bends. Most of the time they should be stainless steel. They should be really robust and relatively wide, because they need to carry the weight of those tanks, and they need to put them together, and they really need to be fixed. There is no place for those tanks to wobble or move around, because then they are connected by the third piece, which is the manifold, with an isolation valve in the middle that allows to isolate those tanks. And if the bends are not assembled properly in relation to the manifold, and the tanks that are not parallel, they might be a little bit skewed, they might be as well not really flat, but they might be a little bit uneven, then the whole system might leak. So the assembly of the twinset is as well requiring a certain skill set. So I would recommend just to buy a ready one. Do not play if you do not have an experience with assembling doubles, because this might create a lot of leaks from everywhere. So potentially every single O-ring that you have on that valve, on that manifold, will leak. So now a little bit more so the next components, let's say, so we have tanks, we have bends, we have a manifold with an isolator knob, and then you can see the knob on the diver's back here, just in the middle. And then with this, because this equipment is much heavier, and this equipment requires a really very fixed position on the diver's back, it has to be used with a back plate that it's fixed with screws to that system, and of course a wing that will support it. And then if you are using a wing, and if you are using this type of configuration that we are using, you would need to have a wing with certain volume, so increased volume, that it can actually lift and support the twinset underwater and as well on the surface. So usually the minimum volume of a wing that you would have on a standard twinset, which is maybe S80, so 11-liter tanks, the aluminum ones, or double 12s, which are steel tanks, the minimum volume of a wing that you would need to have is a 40 lbs, because then it will at least hold that equipment on the surface with you in it as well. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about the tanks that people are using, because very often twinsets are considered a equipment for technical divers and cave divers, and actually they do need a certain volume of gas. So for those activities, the minimum volume of gas, or the minimum volume of tanks that I would say are needed, are at least S80, so a little bit more than 11-liter, or double 12s, because then you would have actually the amount of gas that you might need for the dives that you are planning to have. But if you are considering using doubles in a more recreational setting, there are other tanks available which are really very nice to dive. They are much lighter. So if you are beginning, or if you are thinking about entering the world of double tank diving, you might consider using a lighter and a smaller twinset, just to see if the benefits and handling of that equipment is within your capacity, and then just to learn progressively how to increase the weight of it, going to a bigger twinset, and how to increase the complexity of your dives. So the other volumes of tanks that you might consider are double 8.5, which are very popular in Europe. I'm not sure if they are available anywhere else, but they are very nice tanks because they are a little bit longer. They are not so thick, so the diameter of those tanks are smaller, so you might need to, there will be a different set of bends for them, but they are really very nice because they put the diver in a very nice position underwater. They are lighter, and they do have enough gas, and they have more gas than a single tank, because if it's a double 8.5, it will build up to 17 liters of gas that you can have. So the biggest reasonable single tank to dive is 15 liters. There are as well different twinsets like double 7s, double 10s. So still increasing this amount of volume is beneficial within a recreational environment. So you can try to start diving doubles having a smaller tanks. So now the next thing that I would like to talk a little bit more in detail are regulators and how they are set up, because this is the biggest advantage of having a separated or redundant use of those regulators. And there is one thing that you can think as well about, all right, I might have a single tank with a dual outlet, which means I could still connect two separate first stages on my equipment, and that's correct. But the difference here with the twinset is, even though we as well have two outlets and the regulators are separated, so we do have the advantage of separating the gas flow, about which I will talk in a second and why the reason is there. I do have additionally here the ability to isolate those tanks. So if there will be any failure on a tank O-ring or any failure on a regulator, that even if the tank is closed, I would still have the gas leaking, I can isolate one tank from the other and breathe from the other tank, having this source intact and not compromised. And then I can finish my dive with my team, which has as well similarly configured equipment so that we can manage that emergency together. So now if you look at the image there, and I hope it's big enough for you to see that, you will see that we have two first stages, of course, because they are two outlets. And what we are doing here on the twinset, we are separating the gas sources. So in case one is failing, for whatever reason, the regulator is broken, you needed to close the tank's valve because of a leak to conserve the gas that you have, you can always switch to the second tank and you will have the additional gas source there. So on our right post, which means behind your right shoulder, you will have your primary gas source and you will have your primary buoyancy source. So this is these two hoses connected on this image to the right post valve. And then for us as GUE divers, we do have this main buoyancy source and the main breathing source on our right shoulder. And then on the other side, we have the other alternative gas source, which is our backup regulator. This comes on the left side. And as well, we have there potentially a supporting device for buoyancy, which is a dry suit if you are diving one. So this would be connected to your left post, or if you are diving in different environments and different configuration, you might have a dry suit inflation system separate, but this is a little bit different story. And then on the left side as well, you have your SPG. And there are certain reasons of why we have things on a certain way. And for instance, the regulators in a certain position. So for instance, one of the reasons for us to have the primary gas source on your right post comes from cave environment and an out of gas scenario and gas sharing. So first of all, within GUE, when we are sharing gas, we are always donating the gas that we are breathing, so our long hose, which is our primary gas source, which is on our right post. And now if you are, this configuration comes from a cave environment. So if you imagine swimming in a cave or in a wreck, so in an overhead environment, there is quite a chance that you will be hitting the ceiling. And which means if you hit the ceiling, and it could be even a soft touch, you might actually turn the knobs of your tanks. So now the right post, if you are swimming into the cave, or if you are just swimming forward, maybe not into the cave, but if you are swimming forward, the direction of the turning on the right post where the primary regulator is would be in the direction that it would constantly being open. So if you would hit that valve, it would hit it in the direction that it's getting opened all the time. So there is no way that you can swim and accidentally turn that valve off. And this thing we would call a roll-off, which can happen in a cave. So now if you go back to the out-of-gas situation, if you donate your primary regulator to your teammate, and he's in front of you because you are swimming out of the cave, or if you are swimming out of the wreck, he is breathing from your primary post or from your right post. So if this post would be closing as you swim, you could deprive the teammate that you have in front of you of the gas, and he would not be able to do anything about it because the valve that governs the regulator that he's breathing from is on your back and not on his back. So that's why, for instance, for us, the reason to have the primary gas source that we donate on our right post is that in case we share gas, and if I am in an overhead environment, this configuration is safe. So it will be constantly being open. And for me, I will switch to my backup regulator, and potentially, yes, I could close this valve off, but this is my valve and it's on my back, and potentially, because I'm aware of that potential risk, I could reopen that. So this is, for instance, one of the reasons why we have those regulators positioned in that in this particular order. So generally speaking, on the right side, we have our primary sources of buoyancy and gas, and on the left side, we have our redundancy. So we have backup regulator, We have our additional buoyancy help by a dry suit, because mainly, I mean, within GUE, we are not using dry suit as a main buoyancy device. And then we have the SPG, and the reason for the SPG to be there is that in case you would swim and miss that the isolator is closed, which means if you are breathing from your primary regulator, you will be breathing only one tank. So if the isolator is closed and the SPG, so your manometer, is on your left side, you will notice that, because there will be no change in the gas volume on the left tank. So, you know, after 10 minutes of swimming, you check your SPG and it's still 200 bar, so it's still full. It doesn't mean you have a perfect consumption. It means that your isolator or your left post is closed, and then you didn't realize it while making your checks, or you just failed to do those checks. So all of this configuration of a twinset has its purpose. So it's not randomly placed there. It does have a reason, and it supports the type of diving that we are pursuing as an organization. And generally, it's designed for more advanced forms of diving. But even if you are a recreational diver trying to dive with this twinset, you have to be aware. You have to be aware that. You have to be aware that what this equipment can actually do for you. So continuing on very quickly, because I'm running a little bit out of time. If you are diving those twinsets, or if you are entering to the realm of diving twinsets, you just need to be more aware, because you are having more equipment with you that works potentially a little bit differently. So first of all, you need to have something that we call equipment awareness. So you need to understand how the equipment works and what potentially risks you have and how you can solve those problems. So ability to manipulate valves, ability to understand what is the consequence for me of having valves closed behind my neck, or what happens if I close one post, or what happens if I close the other one, is really important to understand how you can solve potential issues if you have them underwater. So you need to be aware that they have more failure points. The valve operation can be confusing, because even if the valves are turning towards the right to close and towards the left to open, they are behind your back. And sometimes people do not have, in the beginning, the understanding which direction really they should be turning the valves to have them open. You need to be aware that they are heavier, which means that if you are walking with them, if you are entering water, if you are on a rocky boat, you need to be able, and you need to evaluate yourself, am I ready? Am I fit enough to really use those gear without having a risk that I injure myself because it's too heavy for me and I do not have the stamina or strength to carry them around. Additionally, this system is not a one-piece system, which means if you have a standard jacket style BC or even a single tank, a wing style BC, they are normally put together, so it's a one piece if you carry it, but here you will have them separate, and every time you will need to attach it to your twinset. So you will have a separate backplate, separate wing. Of course, regulators are always separate, but if you are combining them together, then you just need to be aware to have all of it, to have all of the screws that is needed to attach it, and verify if they are really tightly screwed in, because otherwise the whole system will not be stable. And of course, because the whole equipment is heavier, you would need to be aware that you will need to make a new evaluation of your weighting, because overweighting is one of the biggest issues that divers might have. And then being overweighted in this environment, which is tech-okay, is not really very beneficial. Another thing that you need to be aware of as well, if you're entering that realm, and this would be something that we call environmental awareness, is that those systems will allow you to dive deeper and longer, which means you might potentially, even being recreational diver but not being aware of it, entering the realm of actual decompression, or the obligatory decompression, as we call it. So you might exceed the times that you would usually dive. You might dive longer than normally, and it might be related to having to do a decompression stop. So you need to be aware, or you need to know how to plan those dives in regard of having enough gas to do that. Or you might even need to have additional tanks with decompression gases to do that. So just be aware that increasing your time underwater and your depth is not only a benefit, there are consequences of it. Another thing is that you might be diving, because you're diving deeper and longer, you might get colder quicker because of the water environment. So it depends on how you dive. So maybe you need to consider now switching to a dry suit, because I would not recommend having a super thick wetsuit, because it will increase the complexity in regards of your weighting. And the third type of awareness is team, because then if you are diving in a twinset and nobody else understands what the twinset is, you are bringing yourself into a risk, because if there is something wrong with your equipment and you are trying to handle it, they will not understand what you are doing. If you are having a teammate who is potentially diving twinsets but is too weak, maybe he is not maybe able to carry this equipment, it might be as well a risk for yourself, because if you are in an emergency and this person who does not have enough capacity to handle those equipment and he needs to tow you back to the shore or to the boat, he might not have the strength, he might not have the capacity to help you. There is as well another thing that if you are entering this, or if you are new to that environment, it's not maybe environment, but to this particular equipment configuration, you will be a little bit more stressed. So your capacity as a diver might be as well reduced. So this would be as well all of the awareness points that you would need to consider if you would like to start to use those equipment. And it is not that it's complicated or it's difficult. It's just you need to be aware of certain things. You need to practice certain things. You need to gain experience in them, because for certain environments, as I mentioned in the beginning, you just need them. So remember, cave environment will require you to have a twinset because of the needed gas volume that you will need to carry with you. It gives you more time for exploring. So instead of being only a few minutes at the bottom on your favorite wreck, you might be there much longer, and you actually can do things and see things. You can make a video and so on. And then it as well allows you to have equipment redundancy. So for us as a GUE divers, twinset is something very natural that we are very often using in a recreational setup because of its benefits. So longer time, more stability, redundancy. And very often you just get so used to it that you don't even feel the weight on your back anymore. So in my case, because I'm diving a variety of different configurations, so if I'm switching back to a single tank, it feels as if I have nothing on my back, because it's so light and it's so easy to assemble and it's so easy to manipulate. But as I said, I would not really treat it as an extremely complicated or extremely demanding piece of equipment. It's there. And at a certain point, if you would like to progress to a more advanced forms of diving, you will for sure need to have it because there will be no other way. And of course, we can discuss some other different types of configuration, but I think it's not the topic of that presentation, which I ran over time anyway. So now, in the end, I would like to just add that if you would like to learn more about this, I will be available at our booth at GUE for a while after the presentation. And of course, you can as well visit our website, GUE.com, or even more interestingly for you, probably, if you go to our booth, you can have a 1 month free trial on GUE TV. Where you can subscribe for 1 month free, and then you can browse through videos where the configuration is as well explained. There are more videos that would deal with that type of configuration. As well, if you check our YouTube channel that we recently kind of refreshed and you subscribe to it, you will get notified if we get new videos. And I know that there will be a video coming up soon that compares single tank to a twinset diving. So I would just encourage you to stay tuned with our social media platforms, because then you might have a benefit of viewing some more videos. So for now, I would like to thank you very much for listening. If you would have any question, just go ahead and ask them. And then if there is nothing more coming up, I would like to thank you very much for listening. And I will see you tomorrow at very early in the morning. I mean, it's not super early, but it's I think it's 4 a.m. GMT time, and I will be talking about instructor training within GUE. So thank you very much for now.